What's poppin', everyone? It's VenomousStare. Today I'm going to be doing a commentary not only with webcam, but one that's not so much necessarily about the game itself. This isn't going to be a build order guide or a map tutorial. It's going to be a much more loosely based commentary about my experience with Starcraft. Because frankly, I feel the need to do that. I feel as though I've made enough videos and enough content, whether it be guide videos, pro gamer casts, first person VODs, clips from live streams, build order tutorials. I've made a lot of Starcraft videos. So I honestly think it's pretty necessary, and it would be interesting for me to talk about how I got into the game. So I got into Starcraft around early 2012, and at this point in my life, the Texas Rangers had just lost the second World Series in a row. And you might be wondering, why the hell is this guy talking about baseball if it's a Starcraft video? Well, I love baseball and I'm very into baseball, and it was something that I've been following since I was a child. And I'm from Texas and my favorite team is the Texas Rangers. So to see the Rangers get one strike away from winning a World Series twice and then proceeding to lose was not only jarring and disappointing, but it was one of these things that made it where it was actually less entertaining to follow the sport, and it made me sort of discouraged and disappointed. So one day in 2012 I was sick from school. I was a junior in high school at the time, back in 2012. And I decided to play my favorite and only strategy game I had played up until that point, Red Alert 2, against the computer. Well, back in these days you couldn't just play the game if you had it installed, you had to have the disc. And unfortunately I couldn't find the disc, as you see a proxy star port on the way as well as a Protoss expansion. So I went to YouTube and basically typed in something along the lines of best RTS game, and I stumbled across a Husky Starcraft video before he deleted his channel like a coward. And the video, I'll never forget, it was Cats vs Drewby ZVT on Metalopolis. And now keep in mind I haven't seen this video for about 7 years, and it wasn't really a popular game that was significant within the context of the game, but it was the first sort of game from pros I had ever seen, and I decided to buy the game with my friend Riley Blake, and we played together. At this point I played Zerg and he played Protoss, and we would play custom games against each other. And it's sort of interesting to look back in those days, because whenever you first start and you're really legitimately bad at the game and you don't really know how control groups work and you don't know how hotkeys work and you don't know what to do on certain maps or which maps to veto or how to even macro on a basic level, it can be a very difficult, discouraging game. But thankfully I had my friend Riley Blake as well as a few other friends, Cody, who didn't play for very long, Spencer, who is my 2v2 partner and cousin, as this Nexus is going to go down 2 lings. Of course it's out of the tank range of Bladder Boy. And Bladder Boy raised his depot. This can be an annoying thing if you're trying to defend a base as non-Terran and you have a Terran ally. Their instincts just tell them that you're shit and they need to wall in to protect their main. So oftentimes this happens where Terran will sort of wall you in, and even though you have some defensive units, you can't defend. But in this case there was not enough barracks units to defend, but it's just sort of something worth noting. I've had a lot of games where I'll be Terran or Protoss or Zerg and I'll have a Terran ally and I'll want to defend my expansion, and my one basing ally will just sort of say, well, I'm not going to die to lings, are you fucking kidding me? And this will happen. The base will be severely delayed. The red team is very behind. Bladder Boy as well as his ally Coots are both very behind. And we can see a proxy battlecruiser play is going to be the objective here for Bladder Boy. Now if you're going for proxy BC, you're almost always going to walk them in and then keep the teleport in your back pocket. That's pretty much the entire reason that you go for a proxy, is so you can save your teleport. And we can see the eye drunk player, the Sacred, has nothing that can shoot up other than queens. And Savagewood here has gone for a nice little 3-gate expand with Robo and is trying to take his third. So the BC is going to come up here, and I'm going to take a swig here. And come up to defend the BC. Now the BC does a shitload of damage. And if you're a Protoss player who is half intending on defending a Terran all-in and half intended on defending a Protoss all-in, you know, sometimes it can be difficult to make enough units that shoot up. You know, the more I play Protoss, the more I realize how good speed zealots are, and if you can make a lot of speed zealots, that can sort of cushion you through the bullshit. Now, speed zealots aren't the end-all be-all, but if you get upgrades, especially double upgrades, armor specifically, and you make a lot of speed zealots and a little bit of support, you can be okay. But the point that I'm trying to get at most of all, guys, is that if you get surprised by some air units, a lot of times you can be in sort of a crappy situation where you have a lot of zealots, and it can be very problematic. Now remember, 2v2 is a very different game type in the sense that whenever you have to contend with two different people doing different builds whenever they're a different race, it's the sort of thing that stacks on you, because think of all the all-ins Protoss can do. Think of all the aggressive options the Protoss player has. Now throw a Terran in too, it's nearly impossible to contend with all of the different sort of all-ins that two different races can do to you, especially when you consider that one race can do something extremely cutthroat while the other plays safe, and you can even be caught off guard by something that wouldn't be normal. Because in a 1v1 game, let's just say for instance, a Terran, I know this isn't necessarily the case, but a Terran would not be able to play this greedy, to take a hidden base in the corner, to go into fast BC with literally zero upgrades, no stim, no +1. Look how delayed the initial upgrades on the barracks are. I mean, he's just now starting stim. In a 1v1 game, this would be very problematic. In a 2v2 game, you can get away with it. And that's something that's sort of interesting about 2v2, is we see Savagewood has about saturated his third, and is already working on saturating his fourth. So some nice macro play from Savagewood as the Zerg, the Sacred, takes a third base. Now in this situation, whenever you see quick battle cruiser, you really do need to make spores and queens like we see, which is good, but you need a handful of hydras, preferably with one of these upgrades. Now hydra range is actually very important when it comes to fending off aggressive counterattacky type stuff, or whenever it comes to defending drop pressure. But in general, speed I would say is the superior upgrade. The point that I'm trying to make is regardless, you need one of the upgrades. You know, the Hydra is a lot like the Roach speed upgrade in the sense that anytime you make a Hydra Den, you really need to just go ahead and make that one structure that's the money structure. And what I mean by that is the money upgrade. So if you make the Roach Warren, you get Roach speed. If you make the Hydra Den, you get range or Hydra speed. But to neglect it completely is frankly a mistake, because this is one of these upgrades where both of them are very powerful, and it's so good where you don't even want to pick one or the other. You want to get both as soon as possible. Some players will even just queue them up immediately. More battle cruisers being tellied out as Savagewood does fend off the harass again for his ally, as the Sacred here just really has not been able to do anything significant in terms of defense. Notice how sloppy his drone saturation is. He's only mining out of 1 out of 4 gases. Meanwhile, Savagewood has added on some extra gates, and the Sacred is actually getting some map control. This base has a problem. It is very peculiar to make a base where your proxy was, but here we are. Of course, Koos was intending on helping him out with the Warp Prism, and did in fact help him out with the Warp Prism, but this is sort of the con of taking a hidden base, is that if the base gets scouted, it's so hard to defend, and it looks like Savagewood is going to group up here with his eye drunk ally, this Sacred, and just mow this down. If you have more than one immortal, this is actually pretty easy, to be frank. So I don't think I'm going to be able to tell my whole story in this one commentary, as this corner base is going to go down for certain. Nice little storm going down here. Oftentimes if you storm sort of both sides of the mineral line whenever there's a master pair going down on a BC, it can help. And we can see Bladder Boy here is lamenting the death of his corner base, and Savagewood is going to press up and see if there's a third already taken. This third is actually a bit harder to kill, it's more central, but if you kill either one of these bases, it can actually be pretty damn easy to come up and snipe this third. So in 2012, couldn't play Red Alert 2 because I didn't have the disc, so I looked online. Oh, Starcraft 2 is the best RTS. My friend Riley Blake gets it. I quickly convinced my cousin Spencer, who really likes RTS games, to get it. And we play 1v1 against each other and 2v2 with each other and continue to learn about the game as a tank gets sniped there and just try to get better. Of course, I'm watching streams. Now this is the absolute height of StarCraft 2. Oftentimes you'll hear this phrase as we see Savagewood desperately trying to run into two people at once, but it's not really going to work. You'll see this phrase very frequently parroted by modern day StarCraft 2 casters. Oh, the game's the best that it's ever been. The game's never been this good. You know, the game keeps growing. The player base keeps growing. Now, this isn't an outright lie. This isn't something that's just totally disingenuous. But this is one of those things that isn't really true if you sort of unpack everything and look at the context. So yes, it is true that since StarCraft has gone free to play, and since maybe 2017, there has been an increase in player base. There is a steady amount of people playing it, including new players as well as consistent players, and people are interested in the best RTS ever. I think it's worth noting that if your average computer game player sets out to play an RTS, they're going to come to the conclusion, if they have any wits at all or can read any sort of forum post, that StarCraft is in fact the best. Now I think we sort of get in this weird situation where a lot of people are turned off by how difficult StarCraft is in games like Company of Heroes that require way less micro and way less APM become popular. But at the end of the day, when you look at how units micro as far as how quickly they react, you know, the NPCs and the coding and the just bare bones of the game, reactions and whatnot, that's probably the most important thing in an RTS game, is how fast units react and how much you can actually micro and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, if you're playing an RTS game where nothing is responsive and it's pretty much like a turn-based thing where everything you do has a long wait behind a reaction, that's just shit, to be frank. Speaking of shit, we can see that the blue player Zerg has basically no upgrades, while his ally has 3-2-3 upgrades, and the enemy team has 1-1 as well as Lance, both speed upgrades from the Robo Bay and Charge, and the Red Terran has +1. Now thankfully, if we're going to go back a little bit, Savagewood did do a little bit of a drop here. So the Hydras push up here without any support and just died of the Colossus. But Savagewood goes for a double immortal drop with Dark Templar. Remember, it is twice as easy to miss things in a 2v2 than it is a 1v1. A lot of times when you kill people's extractors, it's merely meant to limit vision, not necessarily how much gas that they're getting. And a turret that was going up is sniped. If you're doing DT harass and see your opponent making turrets, you should always snipe the turrets. And Savagewood's going to do some work on these add-ons here. Not only is this annoying if you're behind, but when you're ahead, having to stop all your production for a long time to remake add-ons is annoying. And if your opponent just never defends their add-ons, and their allies doing a counterattack, you can straight up snipe the barracks themselves, which is just huge. Because even if your opponent recovers and re-expands, they're going to be missing the main part of their production. Multiple Colossus here, as well as a paltry amount of Terran units and a couple Archons. They're going to interact with the Protoss army of Savagewood as he continues to do army damage in the main, but he does pick up the Power Mortals after the defense is brought over. And it is of course worth noting that Koos, the red Protoss, was forced to actually bring back defense due to the fact that Savagewood did Warp Prism Harass, and it wasn't just random. The reason that the Protoss the reason the Protoss stopped reinforcing, rather, was the fact that he was harassed. Now this is pretty basic StarCraft. If you're being harassed or attacked, one of the main ways you can stop it is actually just doing harass. Even if it's in a 2v2 and the person who's not attacking you is the dude who is having to think about whether to retreat or not, because we saw robo units had to be retreated because the Terran player, Bladder Boy, was simply put in a position where if he didn't defend himself, he was going to be screwed. I mean, look at this. He's building 3 more barracks. If we go to units, what does he have? He has 30 SCVs, which is pretty far behind. Now, the Zerg isn't doing great, but at the same time, he has way more production than the Terran player. The Terran player doesn't really have shit in the way of production, and his natural is a planetary fortress, for God's sake. If you're a Terran and all of your bases are planetaries, then you're in bad shape. Savagewood is trying to limit these drops back here, and it can be very frustrating, as we see one of the full medevacs go down. It can be very frustrating on these maps with all this neutral airspace to defend drops. So after I had discovered StarCraft in 2012, I started to learn more and more about the game, watch streams, and I got to a point where I was interested enough in the pro scene to start going to pro events. And I went to my first pro event in DreamHack Austin 2012. This was a phenomenal event. The first pro gamer I ever met was Stefano, and I also met a couple other guys, but it wasn't like an MLG where everyone's sort of in an open pit and you can go up and talk to them. It was an invitational tournament. And I'm not going to be able to finish my story because we're going to attack into this army with 2 people, and there's about a dozen High Templar with Psystorm. And this is the thing about Psystorm, is you can just coat your opponent's army in it, and it is almost impossible for them to win, even when they have a ton of Colossi. He's up to 2-1 at this point, but again, my upgrades are just phenomenal. So I'm going to have to continue my story about how I discovered StarCraft later, but it all starts with me trying to play Red Alert 2 on a sick day, and frankly not having the disc, and just trying to figure out, well, Red Alert 2 is like 10 years old, so what RTS is best, and I discovered StarCraft 2, and I learned more and more about the game, and eventually get into the pro scene. Now that only really covers like a few months of my StarCraft history, so I suppose I'm going to have to make a part 2. And this guy, shit for brains, Koos, says 2v1 all game. Remember, some brain-dead retard decides to crybaby about their ally when they did nothing of significance all game? Just tell me you don't care. This is like every single 2v2 game is some retard after their ally leaves. Oh, is my ally. Like, we're in an 18-minute game here and he didn't do anything. And look at this, look how many bases I'm on. And you expect me to sit here and respect, oh, it was my ally, you know. That's the reason I never did anything of note or macroed very well. It was all my allies' fault, and that shit just doesn't fly. I'm so tired of that crap. It's every game in 2v2, like, type GG and move on. Or don't type GG, I don't give a shit. But don't say, oh, it's my ally. You know, I floated money and didn't do anything correctly, but oh, it was my ally. Like, just look at Protoss versus Protoss and who was on a bigger economy with more production. It's a laughing stock. Now you got a 12 gas toss versus a guy who is, you know, mining on about 3 bases. 2 of them mined out, 1 of them destroyed. The main base is gone, and you're gonna bitch about your ally. It's a joke. Sub for more.